The pattern you can't see but always follow. She reached for her phone before her eyes were fully open. Not because something urgent waited, but because reaching had become reflex, a rhythm older than intention. The screen glowed in the half-dark, and for a moment she wondered, when did checking become waking? Patterns don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, like grooves worn into stone by water that never meant to carve. We call them habits, routines, tendencies, but beneath those labels lives something more ancient, a script we follow without reading, a map we navigate while insisting we're exploring freely. He poured coffee at the same angle every morning, left foot first into his shoes. The same internal argument about whether today would be different, followed by the same small surrender. Not weakness, just gravity, the mind seeking its familiar altitude. But what if the patterns we can't see are the ones steering us most? There's a moment, brief, barely noticeable, between stimulus and response. Neuroscientists call it the cognitive gap. It lasts milliseconds. In that space, the brain runs a silent auction. Which learned behavior wins this moment? Which groove pulls strongest? The conscious mind rarely gets a vote. By the time you notice you've acted, the pattern has already chosen. She scrolled through her feed with the same thumb motion she'd used 10,000 times before. The dopamine pattern was simple. Seek, find, brief satisfaction, slight emptiness. Seek again. It had been trained on millions like her, all following routes they thought were choices. Part of her wondered if awareness changed anything, or if knowing the pattern was just another loop. He sat in traffic, route memorized, mind elsewhere. The same exit, the same frustration, at the same light. His father had driven a similar commute for 30 years. Different roads, same rhythm. Patterns aren't always personal. Some are inherited, handed down like blueprints. We execute without questioning the architect. Psychologists have a term for this: behavioral schemas, mental frameworks that automate decision-making. They save energy, they create efficiency. They also create blind spots, the size of entire lives. When was the last time you chose your morning instead of performing it? The pattern reveals itself in what we defend. She noticed it during an argument that felt both urgent and strangely familiar. The same tone, the same defensive pivot, the same need to be understood, clashing with the same inability to listen. Relationships are where patterns become most visible and most invisible. We see the other person repeating themselves while standing inside our own loop, insisting it's different this time. Attachment theory maps these grooves with clinical precision. The anxious pattern seeks reassurance. The avoidant pattern seeks space. The secure pattern seeks presence. Each learned before language, encoded in the nervous system like muscle memory of the heart. You can't think your way out of a pattern written in your body, but you can notice the script while it's running. He closed his laptop not to quit, but to listen. In stillness, the noise inside him became readable. The pattern of productivity had a specific texture: urgency without importance, motion without direction, the dopamine hit of crossing off tasks that didn't actually matter. Somewhere along the way, being busy had become his primary identity. Stopping felt like disappearing. Maybe efficiency had become another form of escape. Research from Stanford's Behavior Design Lab reveals something both obvious and overlooked. We don't resist patterns because they're bad for us. We resist changing them because the pattern has become who we think we are. The smoker isn't addicted to nicotine as much as to being someone who smokes after coffee. The overworker isn't addicted to achievement as much as to the identity of being needed. The pattern becomes the self, and threatening the pattern feels like threatening existence. She tried something small. One morning, she left her phone in another room. The first hour felt like phantom limb syndrome, her hand reaching for what wasn't there. The urge to check pulsed like a second heartbeat. But beneath the discomfort, something else emerged. Silence that wasn't empty. Attention that didn't know where to land, so it landed on the present. The coffee tasted different. Not better, just tasted. Breaking a pattern doesn't require willpower. It requires replacing the cue. Neuroscience makes this clear. You can't delete a neural pathway. You can only build a new one and travel it more often. The old route remains like a trail through woods, slowly reclaimed by undergrowth. The pattern doesn't disappear. It just stops being the default. But first you have to see the trail you've been walking. He noticed his pattern in relationships. The same attraction to unavailable people. The same belief that love required pursuit. The same ending, rewritten with different names. His therapist asked a question that felt too simple to matter. What if the pattern is trying to protect you from something you're not ready to face? Patterns aren't enemies. They're solutions to old problems. The anxious attachment pattern solved childhood unpredictability by staying hypervigilant. The perfectionist pattern solved feeling unseen by becoming undeniable. The emotional numbness pattern solved overwhelming pain by creating distance. Every pattern was once adaptive. The cost is that it keeps solving yesterday's problem in today's moment. Part of him wondered if letting go of the pattern meant facing what it had been protecting him from all along. Behavioral economists describe something called the default effect. When given a choice between opting in or doing nothing, over 90% of people choose nothing, not because they prefer it, but because doing nothing is the path of least resistance. Inertia isn't laziness, it's the pattern asserting itself as reality. She realized her life had been shaped more by defaults than decisions. The career path she'd stayed on because switching felt harder than continuing. The relationship that persisted because leaving required more change than staying. The city she lived in, not because she loved it, but because she'd arrived and never asked if she should leave. Momentum had been mistaken for purpose. When did the current become the choice? He tried to meditate. The instruction was simple. Notice when the mind wanders, then return to the breath. Within seconds, his thoughts spiraled into planning, replaying, judging. He tried to force focus. The mind scattered further. Then he understood. The meditation wasn't about stopping thought. It was about seeing the pattern of thought, the way the mind reaches, the way it resists stillness, the way it narrates itself into existence. The pattern isn't the problem. The invisibility of the pattern is the problem. Research from MIT's neuroscience department observed something poetic. Awareness itself begins to dissolve rigid patterns, not through effort, but through observation. The brain, when it sees its own automation, starts introducing variability. Small deviations, micro-experiments. The pattern loosens not because you fight it, but because you've stopped believing it's you. Sometimes clarity isn't found, it's allowed. She started noticing patterns everywhere. The way her father ended phone calls, the way her manager framed feedback, the way entire cities moved during rush hour, a choreographed dance no one had consciously designed. Patterns aren't just personal, they're cultural, collective grooves worn by millions, each person convinced they're choosing freely. Social psychology calls this the third-person effect. We see others following patterns while believing we're immune. The algorithm manipulates them, not us. The advertising influences them, not us. The cultural script shapes them, not us. Meanwhile, we follow routes we've never questioned, inside landscapes we've inherited. What if seeing the pattern in others is easier than seeing it in ourselves? He didn't change overnight. The pattern remained. But something shifted in his relationship to it. He could feel the pull, the urge to check, to optimize, to perform, and sometimes he followed it. But now there was space between the urge and the action. A pause he hadn't known was possible. In that pause lived the only freedom he'd ever found. Viktor Frankl wrote from a concentration camp. Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. The pattern tries to collapse that space. Awareness expands it. Not forever, not perfectly, but enough to introduce possibility. The cursor still blinked, but now it wasn't demanding words. It was waiting for presence. She wondered what her life would look like if she followed different patterns. Not dramatic reinvention, just small deviations, a different morning routine, a different response to stress, a different question when facing decisions. Maybe transformation wasn't a single moment of change, but 1,000 small disruptions to automation. Death by 1,000 choices. He tried to disconnect and ended up connecting deeper. Not to networks, but to the quiet shape of his own attention. The pattern had been running him. Now he was learning to run alongside it, observing its shape, questioning its origin, choosing sometimes to step off the trail and see what else existed in the woods. What surprised me most wasn't how a simple analog journal changed my workflow, but how it redefined what productivity meant to me. I wasn't expecting paper and pen to alter my rhythm of thought, and honestly, I tested it more than once before I understood what actually mattered. Writing by hand slowed me enough to notice which tasks were patterns and which were choices. This isn't a recommendation, just a reflection that stayed with me. I'll leave the link below if you feel called to explore what I mean. Patterns will always exist. The brain is a pattern recognition machine. Efficiency demands automation. But there's a difference between being automated and being aware of the automation. One is sleepwalking, the other is lucid dreaming. Same dream, different relationship to it. She reached for her phone, then paused. The urge was still there, but so was she. The pattern was visible now, and visible patterns lose their inevitability. They become options instead of destiny. Grooves instead of canyons. Routes you can choose to walk or choose to leave. The pattern you can't see is the one you're inside. The moment you see it, you're already somewhere else. Not free from patterns, but free to choose which ones you follow, and which ones you allow to fade back into the woods, slowly overgrown, gently forgotten, no longer the only path home. When was the last time you truly listened to your own thoughts? Not the loud ones demanding attention, but the quiet patterns underneath, the rhythms you've been dancing to without hearing the music. What part of this reflection spoke to you most, and from where are you watching? Let's keep the dialogue open, quietly. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video.